She took over my forest cabin. Now she calls it our home. The stranger in the cabin, the forest, was quiet, holding its breath as night settled in. The small wooden cabin stood alone between the tall pines, a place where one man had chosen to live away from the noise of the world. He liked silence. He liked the sound of firewood cracking in the stove, the whistle of the wind, and the comfort of being unseen. But that night the silence broke. It began with a faint hum, so soft it could be mistaken for wind at first. Then came the light spilling through the cracks of the cabin walls, bright and unnatural. The man froze where he stood. His hand, holding a cup of hot tea, trembled slightly. The glow grew stronger, spreading through the trees like a blade cutting the dark. He stepped to the window, his breath clouding the glass. The forest outside was alive with strange colors, green and silver lights moving like waves. His heart quickened. This was no lantern, no hunter, no passing vehicle. The ground shook beneath his feet, so gently at first that he thought it was his imagination. Then he heard it. A crash, sharp and violent, not far from his cabin. The animals scattered. He could hear them, rabbits darting, birds fleeing, the low growl of a bear retreating deeper into the woods. The forest itself was afraid. He felt it, and for the first time in years, fear wrapped itself around him. The man reached for the old rifle resting near his door, though he had not fired it in years. His finger brushed the wooden stock, but before he could decide what to do, there came another sound. This one was closer, softer. It was not the crash of something falling. It was the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, uneven. The doorknob rattled. He froze. His cabin was his only safe place, his only shield. Yet the door creaked before his hand even touched it, opening just enough for the cold night air to slip in. Something moved in the shadows, and then he saw her. She collapsed across the threshold, her body tall and strange, her skin pale as moonlight. Her breathing was ragged, her clothes torn, and her eyes, large, bright, filled with something not human, stared up at him before they fluttered closed. For a moment he stood there, rifle still in his hand, paralyzed between instinct and shock. Every part of his mind told him to push her back out into the night. She was not human. He could see it clearly. Her skin shimmered faintly like starlight, her hair silver and tangled, her fingers long and graceful even in weakness. But another part of him, a part he could not silence, told him to help. He had lived alone so long that even this stranger, even this creature, seemed less of a threat and more of a plea. He knelt beside her, touching her shoulder carefully. Her skin was cold, too cold. She shivered as though she had been running for days. He dragged her inside, closing the door with a firm push. The lights outside had begun to fade, but the forest still echoed with distant sounds, something moving between the trees, searching. He shut the curtains and placed her on the old wooden bed near the fire. Her breathing was shallow. He could see a wound along her side, glowing faintly as though her blood carried light. He stared at it, not knowing whether to fear it or to marvel. His hands shook as he tore an old cloth to press against it. She winced but did not wake. The man sat back, staring at her. She was not from this world. That much was clear, but why was she here? And who or what had brought her to his cabin? The hours dragged on. The forest quieted again, though he could not relax. Every crack of wood in the stove made him flinch. Every whisper of wind outside the window felt like a warning. He tried to read her face, but her features were strange to him. She seemed fragile, yet carried a presence that filled the room as though even unconscious she claimed the space. When at last her eyes opened, he felt his chest tighten. They were not human eyes. They glowed faintly like stars caught in water, and they looked at him not with fear but with a strange recognition. "You brought me inside," she whispered, her voice soft but heavy, as if each word cost her strength. He did not answer at once. His mouth was dry, his thoughts tangled. "You were dying," he managed to say. "I could not leave you out there." Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but close. "Then this place is no longer yours alone," she murmured. "It is ours now." Before he could question her, her eyes closed again, and she slipped back into silence. The man sat beside the fire, rifle across his knees, listening to the distant hum still rolling through the forest. He had let her in. He had made his choice, and as he watched the glow of her wound flicker in the firelight, he realized something heavy and undeniable. His cabin was no longer a safe place. It was no longer only his. Something vast and dangerous had found its way to his door, and it had chosen to stay. The night stretched on, long and restless. The man did not sleep. He sat near the fire, his rifle across his knees, his eyes fixed on the figure lying on his bed. The forest outside was quiet again, but he knew the silence was not natural. It was the kind of quiet that came after something dangerous had passed through, and perhaps was still lurking nearby. The woman, or whatever she was, breathed softly, though every so often she winced in pain. The faint glow from her wound pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. He had bandaged it as best he could, though his hands had trembled while doing so. Now he watched the glow fade and brighten, wondering if it meant she was healing or if it meant she was dying. He leaned forward, studying her face. She looked almost human, yet not quite. Her skin carried a faint shimmer that caught the firelight in ways human skin never could. Her hair, tangled in silver, spread across the pillow like threads of light. He found himself staring too long and then turned away, ashamed of his own curiosity. Hours passed before she stirred again. Her eyes opened slowly, glowing faintly in the dim cabin. She looked at him without surprise, as though she had expected to find him sitting there. "You are awake," he said, his voice low. Her lips parted, dry and pale. "Water," she whispered. He hurried to fetch the old metal cup, filling it from the jug on the table. When he pressed it to her lips, she drank slowly, each swallow weak but steady. When she finished, she rested her head back against the pillow and closed her eyes again, though she continued speaking. "They are still searching," she murmured. The man stiffened. "Who?" Her eyes opened again, fixing on him with an intensity that unsettled him. "The hunters," she said. "They came for me. They will come again," he frowned. "Hunters? What kind of hunters?" Her gaze shifted toward the window, toward the dark forest beyond. "Not of your kind," she said softly. "Not of your world. They want me dead." A chill ran through him. He gripped the rifle tighter, though he knew it would do little good against something that could cross the stars. "Why?" he asked. Her breathing grew shallow again, and for a moment he thought she might not answer. But then she spoke, her words slow and heavy. "Because I carry what they fear, knowledge, a secret they wish to erase. I am not only a fugitive, I am a threat to them, and now to you." The man felt the weight of her words press down on him. His cabin, once his refuge, had become a hiding place for a hunted stranger. He wanted to tell her to leave, to take her danger with her, but he could not bring himself to say it. She was weak. She was wounded. And she looked at him with eyes that carried both warning and trust. He stood and began pacing the cabin, his boots creaking against the wooden floor. "You should not be here," he muttered. "This place is not meant for this." "You brought me inside," she reminded him softly. "You chose." The truth of it stung him. He had made the choice. He could have closed the door. He could have left her to die in the cold. But he had not. And now the weight of that decision pressed on his shoulders. As the hours crept toward dawn, the forest outside stirred again. The man peered through the window, seeing only shadows and mist. Yet he felt eyes on him. He felt the trees holding secrets. When he turned back, he found her watching him. Her gaze was steady now, her strength slowly returning. "You must understand," she said, her voice clearer. "They will not stop. Once they set their trail, they follow until nothing is left. They will tear down your walls, burn your forest, and they will kill you if you stand between us." He clenched his jaw. "Then why come here?" "Why to me?" Her answer was slow but certain. "Because you were here. Because you opened the door. Because you are different." The word struck him strangely. He did not know what she meant. He was no soldier, no hero. He was only a man who had chosen to live alone in the woods. But her eyes held no doubt, and that unsettled him more than her wound, more than her glowing blood. The fire dimmed as morning began to gray the windows. Birds called cautiously from the treetops. The man stood, stretching his stiff arms, his eyes never leaving the door. The woman shifted on the bed, sitting up with effort. Her face was pale, but her gaze sharp. "They are close," she whispered. "How do you know?" "I can feel them," he swallowed hard. The rifle in his hand suddenly felt like a toy. Still, he gripped it tight, forcing his voice steady. "Then we prepare." She tilted her head, studying him, and for the first time a faint smile touched her lips. "Perhaps I was right about you," she said. The man did not answer. He only looked around his small cabin, at the wooden walls and old furniture, and wondered how long it could stand against enemies not of this world. The silence grew heavy again, The forest waited, and deep inside so did he. The day passed with uneasy silence. The man worked around the cabin, chopping wood and checking his traps. But his thoughts never left the strange woman resting inside. Every time he returned, her eyes followed him, calm yet alert, as though she could hear more than his footsteps. She spoke little, only enough to tell him when she needed water or when the pain returned. He wanted to ask more, but fear kept his questions buried. As the sun fell behind the trees, the forest grew darker, thicker with tension. Even the animals seemed to avoid the cabin. No bird sang. No squirrel moved through the branches. The man noticed it and felt the weight of the coming night pressing hard against his chest. The woman stirred as dusk settled. She sat up slowly, her movement stronger than before, though her wound still glowed faintly beneath the cloth. "They are near," she said, her voice firm now. He paused, setting down the axe he had carried inside. "How near?" "Too near," she whispered. Her eyes shifted toward the window, unblinking. "The hunters have followed me. Their trail leads here. This place will not stay safe much longer." The man felt his stomach tighten. He had lived through storms, wild animals, and harsh winters, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this. Yet when she looked at him, waiting for his response, he forced his voice to remain steady. "Then we get ready." He lit lanterns around the cabin, their soft glow pushing against the darkness. He checked his rifle, loaded it, and placed an old hunting knife at his belt. It felt almost foolish, like a child arming himself against shadows. But it was all he had. The woman rose shakily from the bed, her tall frame casting a strange figure in the flickering light. She touched the wall of the cabin, her fingers trailing along the wood. "This place," she murmured. "It is simple, fragile, but it carries warmth. That is why I chose to stay." He looked at her, confused. "Chose? You collapsed at my door." Her eyes met his, glowing faintly. "I collapsed, yes. But I opened my eyes and found you. You pulled me inside. That was a choice. And now it is ours." Before he could answer, a sound cut through the silence. The man froze. It was faint, but it came from the forest. A low hum, steady and unnatural, drifting between the trees. Then the crunch of snow beneath heavy boots. More than one pair. The hunters were coming. He rushed to the window, peering through the cracks in the wooden boards. At first he saw nothing but darkness and mist, then movement. Shadows gliding silently between the trees, too large and too fast to be human. "They are here," the woman whispered, her voice heavy with certainty. The man's breath quickened. He blew out one of the lanterns, letting darkness cover half the room. The cabin now stood like a small fortress in the woods, waiting for its walls to be tested. The first noise came from the roof. A sudden thud, light but sharp, as though claws had touched the wood. The man's finger tightened on the rifle trigger. Another sound followed at the door, scratching, slow and deliberate. The air thickened with the scent of burning metal, as if the very night carried their presence. The woman moved closer to him, her body trembling but her gaze firm. "Do not open the door," she warned. "Once they enter, we will not hold them back." The scratching stopped. Silence fell again, more terrible than any noise. Then a voice, low and strange, slipped through the cracks of the cabin. It spoke in a language the man could not understand, guttural, sharp, filled with threat. The woman answered. Her voice was soft, yet it carried power. She spoke in the same language, her words quick, defiant. The man could not make sense of it, but he understood the meaning. She was refusing them. The reply came with force. A heavy slam shook the door, rattling its hinges. The man jumped, raising his rifle, heart pounding in his chest. Another slam followed, stronger this time. Dust fell from the ceiling. "They want me," she said, her voice low but steady. "But they know you are here. That is why they wait." The man gritted his teeth. "Then let them know I will not give you up." She turned her head, studying him as though trying to read the truth in his words. "You could still push me out," she said. "You could save yourself." He shook his head, tightening his grip on the rifle. "No, I made my choice when I opened that door." The hunters struck again. This time the sound came from every side. Claws against wood, heavy steps on the roof, shadows moving past the windows. The cabin groaned under the weight of their presence. The man stepped to the center of the room, his breath steady, his weapon ready. The woman stood beside him, her wound still glowing faintly, her strange eyes sharp with determination. Outside, the voices rose in unison. a chant that seemed to shake the trees. The forest itself trembled, and then came the final silence, the kind that falls just before an attack. The man knew the hunters would not wait any longer. The night had only just begun. The cabin shook as if the forest itself wanted to crush it. The man stood with his rifle pressed against his shoulder, his heartbeat thundering louder than the wind outside. The woman's breathing was steady now, stronger than before, her glowing eyes fixed on the door as if she could see through the wood. Together they waited. The first strike came like lightning. The hunter slammed against the wall, claws tearing at the wood. The man fired his rifle, the blast tearing through the silence. The shot echoed in the cabin, deafening, but outside came no cry of pain, only more scratching, more pounding, as if the bullet had struck nothing at all. The woman raised her hand, her fingers trembling but sharp with purpose. The air around her seemed to shimmer. A faint light spread across the wooden boards, sealing cracks where claws had begun to pierce through. The man looked at her, his mouth dry, but she gave no explanation. Her strength was thin, he could see it, but she still stood tall beside him. The window shattered. Shards of glass flew inward as a dark shape forced its way through. The man swung his rifle and fired again. This time the bullet struck, sending the figure stumbling back with a guttural roar. Its body twisted in the half-light. Tall and monstrous, its skin armored with scales that glinted like stone. The creature did not fall. It hissed, retreating just beyond the broken window, its glowing eyes watching. "They test us," the woman said, her voice low. "They want to see how strong we are." "They will find out," the man muttered, loading another round. The roof groaned as heavy steps moved across it. Dust rained down from the ceiling. A claw broke through the wood, tearing long splinters free. The man raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the woman moved. She lifted her arm, and a sudden wave of light burst upward, slamming into the roof. The cabin shook with the force. The claws withdrew and the steps scattered. The man stared at her, shaken. "What are you?" he whispered. Her glowing eyes did not leave the door. "Someone who cannot run anymore." The pounding returned, harder, faster. The hunters were no longer testing. They were attacking. One slammed against the door with such force that the hinges bent inward. The man rushed forward, bracing it with his shoulder. His teeth clenched as the wood cracked. Another strike followed, nearly tearing the door from its frame. He pushed back with all his strength, shouting through his teeth. The woman placed her hand against the wood beside him. A surge of light spread from her touch, sealing the door with a glow that held it together. For a moment the cabin held. The hunters roared in frustration, their voices shaking the trees. Then the roof split open. A massive claw tore through the wood, ripping a hole wide enough for the night air to flood in. A dark figure dropped into the cabin, its body tall and monstrous, its eyes burning like coals. The man fired without hesitation, the blast striking its chest. The creature staggered but did not fall. It reached for him with claws long enough to tear through bone. The woman stepped forward, her wound glowing bright, her hand raised. A burst of light shot from her palm, slamming into the hunter's chest. The force hurled it backward through the hole in the roof, its roar echoing into the forest. But the light left her trembling. She stumbled, her knees weak. The man caught her before she could fall, his eyes locked on hers. "You cannot keep doing this," he said firmly. Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile. "Neither can you." The next wave came fast. Shadows filled the windows. Claws scraped against the wood and voices chanted in their harsh language. The cabin's walls groaned under the weight of the assault. The man fired again and again, the sound of bullets mixing with roars. Splinters flew as the hunters pressed closer. One broke through the window, its massive arm reaching for the man. He swung the butt of his rifle hard against it, the crack of bone sharp in the small room. The creature hissed, withdrawing into the night. Another leapt onto the roof, tearing more boards loose. Cold air poured into the cabin, carrying the scent of ash and blood. The woman stood in the center of the room now, her body glowing faintly with each breath. Her voice rang out in their language, strong and defiant, echoing into the forest. The hunters outside paused, listening. Then their roars answered, louder, angrier. The man reloaded his rifle with shaking hands, his eyes darting between her and the broken roof. He had never fought like this, never felt death pressing so close. Yet he did not run. He would not run. The door shook again, splitting down the middle. He braced himself, ready for the next strike. The woman's hand touched his arm, her grip steady despite her weakness. "They will not stop," she whispered. "But neither will we." The door burst open and the hunters surged forward. The battle for the cabin had truly begun. The cabin shook with every blow. Splinters covered the floor. Smoke curled from the broken roof and the night air was thick with roars. The man's arms ached from holding his rifle, but he did not let go. The woman stood beside him, her body glowing faintly, her breath shallow but her eyes bright. They faced the storm together. The hunters forced themselves through the door at last. 2 figures entered, tall and monstrous, their claws glinting in the firelight. The man fired, the shot echoing loud. One hunter stumbled but did not fall. The second rushed forward. The man swung the rifle like a club, striking its jaw. The crack of impact filled the room. The creature roared and slammed him back against the wall. His breath left him in a burst, his chest burning. Before the claws could reach him, the woman moved. A wave of light burst from her hand, slamming into the hunter's chest. The force hurled it across the cabin, smashing it against the wall. The other hissed and leapt toward her, but the man rose, blood on his lip, and fired point blank. The blast threw the creature to the floor. It twitched, then went still. Silence did not come. Shadows still moved outside. Voices still roared. More would follow. The cabin groaned as claws tore at its walls, pulling it apart piece by piece. The man reloaded, his hands trembling. He glanced at the woman. Her body swayed with exhaustion, her wound glowing fiercely now, but her face was calm. "You cannot keep this up," he said through gritted teeth. Her eyes met his, steady and certain. "Neither can you. But we will not fall tonight." The roof tore wider. A massive figure dropped inside, larger than the rest, its armored body gleaming like stone. The ground shook beneath its weight. The man raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the creature struck, sending the weapon flying across the room. It crashed into the wall out of reach. The hunter lunged, claws aimed for his chest. The man rolled aside, grabbing the knife from his belt. He slashed upward, the blade cutting across the creature's arm. It hissed, black smoke rising from the wound, but it did not slow. The claws raked across his shoulder, sharp pain tearing through him. He fell back, struggling to breathe. The woman screamed, not in fear but in fury. Her body flared with light so bright the cabin seemed to vanish for a heartbeat. She thrust both hands forward and the energy burst like a storm. The hunter staggered, roaring as its armor cracked, its body burning under the force. It stumbled back through the hole in the roof, its scream fading into the forest. The woman collapsed to her knees, gasping, her glow fading to a dim shimmer. The man crawled to her side, his shoulder bleeding, his chest heaving. He touched her arm, his voice rough. "Stay with me." Her lips curved faintly, the trace of a smile. "I am here." Outside, the roars grew distant. The shadows moved back, fading into the trees. The hunters had been driven away, for now. The cabin was broken. The roof torn, the door shattered, the walls cracked. Smoke hung in the air. But they were still alive. Somehow, against impossible odds, they had held the cabin. The man sat beside the fire, pressing a rag against his wound. The woman leaned against the bed, her head resting back, her breath slowing. For a long while, neither spoke. The forest outside was quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This silence was heavy with defeat, the hunters retreating to lick their wounds. Finally, the woman opened her eyes. She looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "You could have let me die. You could have saved yourself." He shook his head slowly. "I was alone for too long. Letting you die would have left me with nothing again. I chose." Her eyes glowed faintly, catching the firelight. "Then this place is no longer yours alone." He followed her gaze across the broken cabin. The shattered windows, the ruined roof, the scattered wood. It was no longer the simple, quiet shelter he had built. But as he looked at her, he realized the truth. "You are right," he said. His voice was rough, but it carried a weight of certainty. "It is ours now." She reached out, her hand trembling, and placed it over his. Her touch was warm, alive. For the first time since she had collapsed at his door, he saw peace in her face. The man leaned back, exhaustion pulling at his bones. His home was broken, his body bruised, his world turned upside down. But as the firelight flickered over them both, he felt something he had not felt in years. Belonging. The cabin might fall apart. The hunters might return. But whatever came, they would face it together. And so, in the deep silence of the forest, with the stars watching above and the shadows waiting beyond the trees, a truth was born. The cabin was no longer his, it was theirs.